This morning, June 28th, 2026, every major news outlet in America is telling you the exact same story. CNN, BBC, Reuters, AP News, they're all saying Iran violated the ceasefire by attacking an oil tanker in the Strait of Hormuz. They're telling you America had no choice but to bomb Iranian targets in response. They're telling you Donald Trump threatened to wipe Iran off the map. But guys, what they're not telling you is that Iran didn't break any agreement. In fact, Iran was enforcing an agreement that America signed. And that changes absolutely everything about what's happening in the Middle East right now. Welcome back to Jiang Strategic Ledger, where we break down the geopolitical moves that mainstream media either misses or deliberately ignores. I'm your host, and today we're diving deep into what might be the most brilliant legal trap in modern warfare history. If you want to understand how Iran just checkmated the world's most powerful military using nothing but America's own signature, hit that subscribe button right now, because you're not going to hear this analysis anywhere else. Let me start with the story everyone's hearing today. The Panama-flagged oil tanker MT Kiku was transiting through the Strait of Hormuz when Iranian drones attacked it. The U.S. immediately launched airstrikes against 10 Iranian military targets. Trump went on Truth Social and warned that America might be forced to militarily complete the job and that Iran will no longer exist if that happens. Every news anchor in America is framing this as Iranian aggression, forcing American retaliation. But here's what none of them are mentioning. There's a document called the Losabad ceasefire agreement that the United States signed with Iran, and buried in that document is something called Article 5. Now, I want you to listen carefully to what Article 5 actually says, because this is where the whole narrative falls apart. Article 5 states that the Islamic Republic of Iran will make arrangements using its best efforts for the safe passage of commercial vessels from the Persian Gulf to the Sea of Oman and vice versa. Notice that phrase, Iran will make arrangements. In legal language, that doesn't mean Iran has an obligation to ensure safety. It means Iran has administrative authority. Iran decides the logistics. Iran determines which vessels go through, by which route, and under whose supervision. The document goes even further. It says Iran will conduct dialogue with the Sultanate of Oman to define future maritime administration in the strait. Notice what's missing from that sentence. There's no mention of America having any coordinating role. There's no mention of America having any say in which corridors ships use. It's Iran and Oman together, period. So when Iran told ships this week that the only authorized transit route was the northern corridor, meaning the corridor inside Iranian territorial waters, Iran wasn't violating the agreement. Iran was implementing the authority that America's own signature transferred to them. Now here's where the numbers get absolutely wild. On Wednesday this week, 70 ships transited the Strait of Hormuz. That's roughly normal traffic. Thursday, after the Iranian Revolutionary Guard warned that ships using unauthorized corridors would face consequences, the number dropped to 54. Yesterday, it dropped further to 40 ships. Think about that for a second. That's a 30% drop in global oil transit traffic in 72 hours, and it wasn't because of military action, it was because Iran published a rule based on Article 5, and ships started following it. But here's the moment that blew everything up. The United States, through something called the Joint Maritime Information Center, which is basically a U.S. Navy operation, tried to establish an alternative corridor, a new transit route running along the coast of Oman in international waters. They did this without coordinating with Iran, without Iran's approval. Iran's response was predictable. You can't do that. That's our call to make under Article 5. Any ship using that corridor is violating our administrative authority. And then the MT Kiku, carrying more than 2 million barrels of crude oil, tried to use the American corridor. An Iranian drone hit it. So the question every news outlet is asking is, did Iran attack a civilian vessel? And factually, yes, they did. But the actual question, the question that determines who's right and who's wrong here, is did that vessel have the legal right to be in that corridor? According to the document that America signed, that's disputed. And when there's a legal dispute about a treaty, you negotiate. You don't bomb. America bombed. This is what I call the Article 5 trap. When a superpower signs an agreement without reading it carefully, or worse, signs it knowing full well what it says, but betting the other side won't dare enforce it, that piece of paper becomes the most dangerous weapon that can be used against them. Iran executed perfect legal warfare. They used America's own signature as a weapon. Now, the obvious question is, why would the most powerful military in human history sign an agreement that gives Iran authority over the Strait of Hormuz? Who in the room thought this was a good deal for America? Understanding that takes us into the entire architecture of this war. When the Law-Sabad Agreement was signed, the United States was under enormous pressure. Not military pressure. America was winning militarily. They had bombed thousands of Iranian targets, established aerial supremacy, degraded Iran's air defense networks significantly. The pressure was political and economic. The Strait of Hormuz was effectively being choked. Traffic was down. Oil prices were climbing. The global economy was starting to seize up. The Gulf Cooperation Council countries, UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, had absorbed more than 1,700 Iranian ballistic missiles and close to 4,000 drones during the conflict. These are American allies, and they were getting pummeled while sitting inside what was supposed to be the American security umbrella. Back in Washington, the political situation was a disaster. The War Powers Resolution had passed the Senate 50-48. Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna was literally threatening to take the president to court. The domestic consensus for continuing the war was cracking. So when the Law-Sabad deal landed on the table, there were two factions in the Trump administration. Faction 1 said, sign it, get out, declare victory, and move on. Faction 2 believed the agreement was just a temporary pause, that once things calmed down, they would find ways to reinterpret it, reimpose pressure, and eventually get the outcome they wanted. You can tell Faction 2 was running the show because of what happened immediately after the agreement was signed. First, the USS George H.W. Bush Carrier Strike Group was still being deployed to the Middle East. If you've signed a genuine peace deal, why are you sending more warships? Second, America brokered a completely separate framework agreement with Israel and Lebanon that allows Israeli forces to maintain a security buffer zone until Hezbollah is disarmed. Iran immediately said, this violates the part of the agreement that says all hostilities on all fronts are supposed to stop. Third, and most importantly, America tried to create its own shipping corridor through the strait without getting Iran's sign off. If you put those three things together, a very clear picture emerges. America signed a document it had no intention of fully honoring, hoping that military pressure and diplomatic maneuvering would let it get the practical outcome. An open strait and diminished Iran, without having to concede the legal authority Article 5 transferred to Tehran. Iran figured this out. Their response was exactly what you'd expect from a party that has the stronger legal position but the weaker military position. They started enforcing Article 5 aggressively, knowing that every time America pushes back against that enforcement, America looks like the party breaking the deal. This isn't chess. This is judo. Iran used America's strength against itself. Now, I want to give you the strongest possible version of America's argument because I never want you to just take my word for things. The strongest American argument is this. Article 5 says Iran will ensure safe passage. That's a commitment Iran made, an obligation. When Iranian drones attacked the MT Kiku, a civilian commercial vessel carrying oil, Iran violated that commitment, regardless of which corridor the ship was using. Safe passage means ships don't get hit by drones. So the United States was entirely justified in retaliating because Iran broke its promise first. This argument actually has real weight in international law. When one party materially breaches a treaty, it gives the other party grounds to respond. But here's what this argument cannot explain. If America genuinely wanted Iran to fulfill its Article 5 obligation of ensuring safe passage, then why did America unilaterally create a transit corridor without Iran's agreement? Think about the logic here. If I sign a contract that says you're responsible for managing the delivery route, and I want you to manage it properly, then I need to work with you on the route. I can't go set up a completely different delivery route on my own and then get angry when you don't recognize it. That's exactly what America did. Iran's foreign minister said it clearly today. The Strait of Hormuz remains under the total oversight and management of Iran. Any intervention or unilateral action will result in exacerbating the situation. So America attacked Iran because a ship got hit while using a corridor America created without authorization. Iran says that corridor wasn't legal because Iran, under Article 5, is the only party allowed to create corridors, and Article 5 was signed by America. If you want to see just how crazy this has gotten, drop a comment below and tell me what you think about America bombing Iran for enforcing an authority that America's own signature transferred to them. I'm genuinely curious to hear your take on this. But here's where this story gets even more significant, and it's a dimension that almost no major news outlet is connecting properly. While America and Iran are locked in this legal and military back and forth over the meaning of Article 5, there's another country watching from the sidelines and experiencing what I can only describe as a slow-motion realization of betrayal. That country is Israel. A recent poll found that 92.1% of Israelis believe Iran was the main beneficiary of the Law-Sabbat agreement. 92%. That's not a controversial position in Israel. That's a national consensus. 86% of Israelis have a negative view of the agreement itself. These are America's closest allies in the region. These are the people whose military flew alongside American B-2 bombers for months. And 86% of them think the agreement that ended the war their American partner dragged them into is a disaster. Here's what happened that explains how we got here. Iran did not collapse. The plan, and there was a plan, even if it was never formally announced, was that a combination of American air power and Israeli intelligence would degrade the Iranian regime to the point of either collapse or total capitulation. Then Israel would be the dominant regional power with no serious adversary left standing. But Iran didn't collapse. Iran took extraordinary damage, yes. They lost air defense networks, conventional military infrastructure. Their supreme leader died in an airstrike in February. But the Islamic Republic didn't fall, the Revolutionary Guard didn't surrender, Iran's decentralized military structure held, so America needed a deal. And to get that deal, America needed to give Iran something meaningful. What Iran wanted was authority over the Strait of Hormuz. That's what Article 5 gave them. And to get that deal, America sat down with Iran in Islamabad. At that table, there were representatives from the United States, Iran, Qatar, and Pakistan. Israel had no seat at the table. Not one. Zero. The very country that had fought this war as America's frontline partner, the country that had absorbed the political costs of being seen as the instigator of the conflict, was excluded from the negotiations that determined the outcome. Qatar, which Israel views as a sympathizer of Hamas, was a key mediator. Pakistan, which has no diplomatic relations with Israel, was the host country. Israel's ambassador to Washington said he needed clarity about American policy. He said the premise of the Israeli-Lebanese talks happening in Washington was that Iran wouldn't be involved. But now there's a mechanism that explicitly includes Iran. He was saying in diplomatic language, I don't know what deal you just made, and I don't think it's what we agreed to. And then J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, responded to Israeli criticism by saying, Israel needs to wake up and smell the reality of the situation that country is in. Let that sink in for a second. The Vice President told America's closest Middle Eastern ally to wake up and smell reality. That's not alliance language. That's a patron telling a client they don't need them anymore. Now, this connects to something much larger than a fight about a shipping corridor. For decades, there's been a strategic vision operating underneath American Middle Eastern policy. Systematically dismantle the regional powers that could challenge Israeli dominance. Iraq, done. Libya, done. Syria, done. Iran was supposed to be the final piece, leaving Israel as the undisputed regional power anchored by American military support. But here's what's happening right now. Iran isn't broken. America signed an agreement that hands Iran authority over Hormuz. America excluded Israel from the negotiations. J.D. Vance is telling Israel to wake up, and 92% of Israelis believe the war ended with Iran winning. The alliance that was supposed to produce Israeli regional dominance is visibly fracturing. If you're finding this analysis valuable and want to share it with someone who needs to understand what's really happening in the Middle East right now, hit that share button. This is the kind of analysis that gets buried by algorithm changes, so sharing really helps get the truth out there. But I want you to understand something crucial about why America can't seem to stop this cycle, even when rational calculation says they should. America is trapped in what I call the ontological spiral. There are two psychological mechanisms at work here that explain why the most powerful military in human history is acting in ways that seem completely irrational. First is ontological security crisis. For more than 70 years, America's identity narrative has been consistent. We are the guarantors of the global order. We are the force that keeps international trade flowing. When goods move around the world safely, when oil gets from the Gulf to Asia, that's because we are here. The Strait of Hormuz is the centerpiece of that narrative. 20% of the world's oil supply goes through that strait. If Iran, the country America has called a rogue state for 45 years, is the entity deciding which ships go through and which routes they use, then America's entire identity narrative collapses. Not because America loses oil access, America doesn't even import much Gulf oil anymore, But because the story America tells about itself, the story of the indispensable nation, requires America to be in control of the Strait of Hormuz, or at minimum, requires that no one else is obviously in control. When Iran started enforcing Article 5, they didn't just challenge American military power, they challenged American identity. And when identity is threatened, nations don't respond rationally. They respond emotionally, specifically with anger. Anger doesn't ask if this response is proportionate or legally defensible. Anger asks one question: how do I reassert who I am right now, immediately? For America, the answer has been the same since 1945. You strike, you demonstrate force, you show the world the narrative is still intact. The second mechanism is escalation of commitment, also known as the sunk cost fallacy. When you've invested enormous resources into a decision, money, time, reputation, you become psychologically incapable of admitting the decision was wrong. Look at what America has already spent on this war: tens of billions in military operations, significant depletion of strategic weapons stockpiles, reputation damage with Gulf allies who watched American bases fail to protect them while they absorbed nearly 4,000 Iranian drone strikes, congressional revolt with the war powers resolution, global media coverage portraying this as an American defeat. Now imagine you're Donald Trump sitting in the White House today, and someone tells you that to honor the agreement correctly, you need to acknowledge that Iran has Article 5 authority over the corridor. What that effectively means is everything America did in this war, every bomb, every aircraft carrier, every threat, was for nothing, because Iran still controls the strait through the agreement America signed. There's not a politician in America, and certainly not Donald Trump, who can accept that conclusion publicly. Accepting it means the whole enterprise was a mistake. The bigger the sunk cost, the more emotionally impossible it becomes to walk away from the mistake. So instead of stopping, you escalate. Every new airstrike is a psychological attempt to justify the previous airstrikes. Every escalation creates new sunk costs, making the next de-escalation even harder. This is the ontological spiral. Wounded identity produces anger. Anger produces escalation. Escalation produces sunk costs. Sunk costs make stopping psychologically unbearable. So the escalation continues, the identity wound deepens, and the spiral tightens. America isn't bombing Iran because it has a good strategy for winning. America is bombing Iran because stopping feels worse than going on. But while America and Iran are locked in this psychological and legal battle, something else is happening that's going to reshape the entire Middle East. The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, are facing an existential choice. They absorbed massive Iranian retaliation while sitting inside what was supposed to be the American security umbrella. They watched American protection prove inadequate. They're now seeing Iran gain legal authority over their economic lifeline through the Strait of Hormuz. And the US-Iran agreement suggests American priorities are shifting away from regional confrontation. These countries have been running their own parallel diplomatic track with Iran throughout this conflict. They're terrified of being caught between a collapsing American security umbrella and a resurgent Iran that just demonstrated it can strike their desalination plants, oil fields, and airports at will. If any of these countries makes a significant move toward a bilateral arrangement with Iran, a non-aggression framework, a maritime agreement that will signal the complete collapse of the American Gulf security architecture, we're witnessing something unprecedented: the simultaneous collapse of both Pax Americana and what some call Pax Judea. Pax Americana, America's role as global order guarantor, collapses when it signs away authority over the world's most strategic waterway. Pax Judea, Israeli regional dominance, becomes impossible without full American backing, which has now been effectively withdrawn. The falling ship numbers tell the real story here. 70 ships, then 54, then 40. That's not just economic disruption. That's a countdown of the old world order. Every day that number drops, every day fewer ships feel safe transiting Hormuz under current arrangements. The new order gets one step closer to emerging. So what should you watch for in the next few days? First, pay attention to which corridor the next ship uses when there's another incident, and there will be another incident. If Iran strikes a vessel using America's Oman corridor, that's Iran continuing to enforce Article 5 authority, doubling down on their legal position. If Iran strikes a vessel using Iran's own authorized northern route, that's escalation beyond the agreement framework, and the situation becomes far more dangerous. Second, watch Israel. Specifically, watch whether Israel uses the Lebanon Framework Agreement to launch new strikes while the US-Iran agreement is supposedly still in effect. Netanyahu has already said the framework gives Israel the right to stay in Lebanon indefinitely until Hezbollah disarms. If Israel acts on that interpretation aggressively, it tells you they've decided to pursue their strategy independently of American diplomatic coordination. Third, watch the Gulf states. Any significant Gulf-Iran arrangement, even something as simple as a maritime safety protocol, signals the end of the American security architecture that's existed since the 1980s. The fundamental question isn't who wins the battle for Hormuz. The numbers already show Iran achieved legal victory there by getting America's signature on Article 5. The question is, when both American global leadership and Israeli regional dominance are simultaneously crumbling, who's building the architecture of what comes next? Who gets to write the rules of the emerging world order? This analysis reveals something crucial about how modern geopolitical power actually works. Iran achieved strategic victory not through military superiority, but through superior understanding of legal warfare and psychological manipulation. They turned America's own signature into a weapon and America's identity crisis into a trap. They proved that in our interconnected world, the right legal document can be more powerful than the world's most advanced military. The old order is ending. Those 40 ships still moving through Hormuz today aren't just carrying oil. They're carrying the last remnants of a world where American military power automatically translated into global control. Every day that number drops, we get closer to whatever comes next. Here's what I want you to do. First, let me know in the comments what you think is the most significant part of this analysis. Are you more surprised by Iran's legal strategy, America's psychological trap, or Israel's exclusion from the peace talks? I read every comment, and your insights often shape future videos. Second, if this analysis helped you understand something you weren't seeing in mainstream coverage, share this video. The algorithm doesn't favor content that challenges official narratives, so shares are how we get this information to people who need it. And finally, if you want to stay ahead of the geopolitical moves that will define the next decade, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because what we're watching unfold in the Strait of Hormuz isn't just about Iran and America, it's about how power works in the modern world and how quickly even the strongest empires can find themselves trapped by their own signatures and their own psychology. The countdown has already started. The question isn't whether the old order will fall, it's what rises in its place. And that story is just beginning. I'll see you in the next analysis.